Good morning. I was told to try and herd the cats. So good morning. We're going to ask people to turn off their cell phones or at least their ringers. We know it's probably impossible to disconnect entirely. I want to thank everybody for being here today. My name is Jane Wooldridge. I am the Senior Director at the Miami Herald. I have been at the Miami Herald for, I'm actually embarrassed to say this, 39 years. And Dan Gelber and I knew each other back when we were just fledgling little people here. So we're very, very pleased at the Miami Herald to be co-presenting this event this morning with the city. Where's my friend Michelle? With the city and the Knight Foundation. Thank you very much. And we are really excited. Nobody's excited about climate change. We're all excited about elevating this conversation and giving it additional legs beyond what was an amazing Aspen Ideas Summit last spring. And we want to thank the Aspen Institute for the conversation, bringing the conversation here, because we all know that we are ground zero for rising seas. We also know that we are pretty close to ground zero for extreme heat. Today notwithstanding. And so elevating this conversation, particularly in this community, is critically important. And as the Miami Herald, which is for over 100 years, has been serving this community, I'm really excited to talk about our expanded climate coverage. Many of you in this room will know Alex Harris, who is our lead climate reporter and does a great job. But we have been able to partner with a number of community funders to expand our desk. And just in the last couple of weeks, thanks to a unique collaboration with FIU and the Knight Foundation, we have been able to add a second position, a young man named Nico Rivero, who grew up here. Nico's not with us this morning because he's at a wedding in Argentina, so we gave him a bye for that. But he is a shared resource between FIU and the Miami Herald, splitting his time. We also have funding from the Lynn and Lewis Wolfson II Foundation to add yet another multimedia climate reporter. We're extremely pleased about this, and we hope to be able to make an announcement about just the right reporter having landed with us very soon. And we are hopeful that we're going to have yet another position that we are working on. So that would give us a best-in-class 4-person climate desk, unlike any other local news provider in the U.S. Or in the world. And that's really important because this is our community. Climate affects absolutely everybody here: homeowners, renters, workers, business people, tech investors, snorkelers, kayakers, food enthusiasts. It affects all of us. And if we can help bring that message home, and then we can talk about potential solutions and adaptations, we will be doing this community the kind of service that we want to do with all of our journalism at the Miami Herald. I'd also like to say that over here is our senior managing editor, Dana Banker. Dana is not new to our community. She's been at the Herald about a year, but she came from the Sun Sentinel, and she is a Florida native. So she also is very keenly aware of the importance of this topic. And if you'd like to know more about any of this, Dana or I would be glad to answer questions. And now I have the great privilege of introducing basically somebody who doesn't need an introduction, but he is my former boss, and he's my friend, and he is, I'm going to posit to say, Miami's most ardent and effective advocate. And that is Alberto Ibargüen, President and CEO of the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation. Alberto.
Thank you, Jane. And if you don't think it's hard to get that kind of an introduction from a news person, you've never been in a newsroom. Thank you, dear. First of all, thanks to everybody who has done so much to make the Aspen Climate Summit here in Miami possible. The Aspen Institute, the cities of Miami Beach and Miami-Dade County, and I'd like to point out that the title co-sponsor, the Jorge Perez Family Foundation and related group, and another sponsor, Lennar Foundation and Stuart Miller, are real estate developers, and that tells you something about where we stand in this issue of climate change in Miami. This is a total mindset change from what it was a few years ago. As for Knight Foundation, many people know us because of our work in helping to create a tech entrepreneurship community here in Miami, and because of our support of the arts, particularly fitting here at New World Center, where we have long endowed the New World Symphony's use of digital technology in innovation, in the making, teaching, and presentation of music. If you have time, I think I see Howard Herring in the back. He can take you upstairs to the Knight New Media Center, and you'll see amazing things that they do. But our roots, of course, are in the news and information world. Knight Foundation was founded on the proposition that informed communities could ensure the best interests of the people in an effective democracy. It's a simple but very big concept. An informed community can determine its best interests, and an engaged community can be mobilized to act in those interests. Supporting informed and engaged communities is at the core of our decision to sponsor the Aspen Ideas Climate. As much as responding effectively to climate issues will require technical and economic solutions, it'll be just as important and difficult to ensure that citizens know why we need to change and to engage communities in that change at the local level. To do that, we need more than good policies and good leaders. We need those policies to be understood and embraced by people, for the people to believe this is an issue to be dealt with now, and that what we do now can stem the tide. None of that will happen by our just talking inside of our filter bubble to people who are already committed and believe that this is the critical issue of our time. When the solutions are complicated, we have got to find ways to explain them clearly and directly, and we can use digital media. This is a gift for an issue like this. We can use digital media to genuinely engage the community in discussions, in the conversation at every single level, including at this conference. I'm a glass half full kind of person, so this kind of conference appeals to me, and when Dan Gelber first said he wanted a solutions-based conference, he had me at hello. This is a practical roundtable held in a place of high risk of sea level rise. And so that carries great symbolism of both the dangers we face and of our determination to find solutions. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce two fellow optimists whose careers have been made by finding, maybe two fellow prisoners of hope might be better. By finding, proposing, and refining practical solutions to intractable problems. Leadership matters, and the two indispensable people in bringing this conference here are the mayor of Miami Beach, Dan Gelber, and the president of the Aspen Institute, Dan Porterfield. Please welcome both of them.
You know, I got to say, Alberto, the problem is you say what I want to say, but so much more eloquently. I feel like I should thank you all. I'll see you. I do want to thank everybody, and that's really my job, is to thank everybody, because, you know, I think the reason we're having this here, and when Dan and I talked about this really about a little more than a year ago, it was because the Aspen Institute, if you go to their website, It's pretty audacious. It says the Aspen Institute's job is to solve the greatest challenges of our world. Okay, I'm just trying to get my car filled up with gas or recharged or whatever. He's solving the problems of the world, the greatest problems, not even mid-range problems. Some of, okay, all right. Some of the greatest challenges. All right, now you've really lowered the bar. But for our city, this is a real thing. I mean, in 4 days, we'll let all of our residents know it's king tide because we get this whole area, not just my city, but the whole region is built on porous limestone, so we get that every day. We just had a very harsh storm, and slow-moving hurricanes should not kill 100 or hundreds of people. That's just the way it is, but we've got challenges. And you can see it everywhere. We just had a summer of such heat that people were sort of wondering what's going on. And so for me, the reason why I think this is so important is that my city's doing what we can. We're raising our roads, we're doing, we're creating swales, we're increasing our tree canopy, changing our ordinances, we're doing all those things. But the truth is what Alberto said, I think, is at the core of this, which is these are surmountable challenges if people are willing to address them with both political will and resources. These are all surmountable challenges. There's an engineering solution, there's ordinance solutions, there's things we can do to prepare ourselves so these climate challenges don't overwhelm us. And so for me, when Dan said, I'd like to bring the awesome power and intellectual capital at solving problems to your city, I was so overjoyed. And when we got the Knight Foundation to say, all of a sudden we had these two brands that frankly classed the whole place up for us to have them here because they focus on this, on informing and solving. Think about that. Those two things are the two pillars of what we're trying to do here. We had a wonderful initial Aspen Institute. I want to thank all, you're right, the real estate community is important, and they think long-term because land stays around for a while. And they've been great, but so many others have, and I want to thank all of the folks. I also want to thank my chief of staff who had a little bit to do with work, Michelle Berger. All right, enough about Michelle. But I really just want to thank Aspen and all of the sponsors and the Knight Foundation because what Alberto's saying is I think you're pouring $10 million more into this place now. Did I just read about that? It wasn't really pouring. It was it was a little more specific and intentional. But that's so that the messaging that happens here and what happens here can go out into the world. And that is what we are trying to do. My city, I'm the party planner for this, but our city is really hosting what I hope to be is an annual global event where serious problem solvers come here to not simply tell each other how to solve these problems and to create the solutions, but inform the world why it's important and how they can do it too. That's what this is about. It's a problem-solving global conference, and the first one was amazing. This is sort of a teaser to what's happening on March, and I want everybody to come, bring your friends. There's gonna be a lot of new stuff there. We're gonna have a solutions tent. We're gonna have more young people on scholarship coming. Instead of 100, it'll be 250. We're gonna do a lot more. There'll be free things for the public. Not everything will be, so please pay up a little bit. But the truth is we want this to be something that is accessible to the world. So we have an audacious goal too. So with that, I wanna ask my friend, and really, we played basketball together 30 years ago. He used to pass a lot and I used to shoot a lot, so we got along very well.
I did a lot of rebounding after you shot, too.
Yeah, oh.
He was asking for it. So thank you, Dan. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Alberto. You know, the Knight Foundation's worked with the Aspen Institute on a lot of projects over the years with a big focus on the media. How do we promote strong local media, freedom of expression, First Amendment protections, and of course, the Knight Foundation is an absolute beacon in this community in so many ways. So to be your partner in this project is a real privilege for us personally. It's a pleasure. And it's also making a difference. There were just one side of this. There were 77 million social media impressions on the Aspen Ideas Climate #1 because of the investment you made. It was, I think, without your investment, there would have been Dan's, social media profile would have been about it, 7 or 8 people. So thank you, 77 million, and your colleague Raul had a big part to do with that too. And also having a big part to do with is some really great colleagues at the Aspen Institute. Greg Gershuni leads our Energy and Environment program. He is just so passionate, productive, effective, low-key, and he gets it done. And we're doing all kinds of work on carbon-free schools and carbon-free shipping lanes and carbon-free ports and an action plan on wildfires. His program is growing in influence. It's all about bringing people together, as Dan said. Bring us together so that we can talk across the sectors, across the experience bases, across community, across differing perspectives in order to identify solutions, and that requires public engagement, as Alberto said. That's what it's all about. And so Greg is not here today, but he's the one of the, sort of like the master brain behind our part of this work, along with then Kitty Boone, who runs our public programs. And Kitty's the one that invented the Aspen Ideas Festival, which is now iconic. We just put on a big summit in partnership with Bloomberg Philanthropies in Amsterdam on the future of cities called City Lab. Kitty has a big one on the future of the internet that we do in New York, and a few others. So those two came together to represent us, and I'm like Dan is the champion of this community, his city, and his staff. I'm the champion of my team, and it's a really great one. This partnership is big for us. We've worked in this area on Latino small business growth, community college excellence. In fact, Miami-Dade Community College won the Aspen Prize, $1 million prize, top performing community college in the country a couple years ago. We have new programming that we've just started that focuses on high talent, low income youth staying local for college and to invest in 5-year internships with those students so that they can really cement their leadership and then take off. And we also do work with the public schools in this area. And this gave us a chance to partner with you, to learn with you, and to really raise the Aspen Institute's flag in this incredibly important part of the country and the world. And we want to do more and more here in Miami Beach, Miami, Miami-Dade. It's an incredible community. We have loved this opportunity to partner with you. I mean, it is a blast. It's a big issue at heart, but this is the talent here, the cultures, the youth, the innovation. This is the place to be. Maybe we'll someday be called the Miami Institute. Now, I hope this is being webcast, so I was only joking, everybody. But we love it here. We absolutely love it here. And so this isn't small. This is big, but it's also with passion and pleasure and purpose and a lot of spirit, a lot of gratitude, a lot of learning for us that we're involved. In partnership, it's only about partnership. We're not going to solve any important problem. It's not about inclusive partnerships that really together people share their perspectives, their expertise, their dimension of the problem. We're going to hear about some aspects of both the problem and the solutions that come from different perspectives in a few minutes. The convening that we had last year was, we put it together pretty fast. Michelle and Dan, the Knight Foundation and our other sponsors were really kind of hell-bent on getting this going. Don't try to design something that takes 18 months to do. Get it going, get going. And so that was a big deal for us. And we pulled it off, and with a lot of good things happening. I really liked hearing Adam Silver talk about the NBA greening. I think we should get everybody from any different background, the military, people that are working in schools, all different kinds of sectors, not just the sector that we know is working on this. A lot of talk about energy solutions, because let's face it, we have to have access to energy. There's a transition to clean energy. If energy goes away somehow in the cause of protecting the climate, what's probably going to go away is an awful lot of human health, an awful lot of industries, and an awful lot of community well-being. And I was at a presentation in New York not long ago where a leader from Nigeria was talking about the critical reliance of the continent of Africa on having energy. And if we have to solve two problems: energy access, which is what is part of having an equitable global economy, and protection of the climate, of the earth, by mitigating the effects of the climate crisis. So as you said, it's a hard problem, long, it's going to take time, it's going to take civic and education and engagement. There was a colleague named Daniela Fernandez who came here, young, she's like 26 or something, who's working as part of a fund, and she's supporting 20 different entrepreneurs who have oceans solutions. All together, you put it together, it's like a mosaic. There's real action happening there. And Daniela I thought, knocked it out of the park last May when she talked about what she's investing in. It was so inspiring. We had Gianna Hutton, who was a senior at Miami Palmetto High School here. And she's also an Aspen Fellow in one of our programs called Aspen Challenge. And she talked about bringing her solutions to her school and how there was so much excitement among her peers about being practical and productive to move the ball forward. Now she's a first-year student at Pomona College on something big called a Posse Scholarship, and she's going to be a big leader for this community. And we need to provide these platforms like this for young people to speak, to have their voices heard, to be able to be part of the solution. And so you sort of have Gianna on the one hand, then you have John Doerr coming here. John Doerr had made a $1.1 billion gift to Stanford investment in their climate research about a week before. And you need everything here. We had all three mayors. It was really bipartisan to see that group work out. I mean, not even nonpartisan. It wasn't even like you wouldn't know who was a D or an R. It was all about regional collective solutions. That was so inspiring, especially given the world we live in today. It's one of the reasons why this place is so important. It's kind of, maybe those of you who work and live here can say this isn't quite so, but I can't tell a D from an R down here. I just see a lot of people that want to make a difference. And so thank you for that. Miami Herald, wow, thank you for being a part of this. Alex, you covered, thank you. You took the time to talk to me on Zoom last year as we were building this up. And we're excited that your team is growing, and thank you for making Alex available to all this, because you've written some great pieces, and thank you for being a part of it. So for 2023, which will be, as Dan said, early March, we're going to have bigger, better, more, and we'll have community leaders, we'll have inventors, we'll have entrepreneurs, we'll have more examples of how to scale solutions and speed and scale, big theme. Last year we hosted 100 young leaders. They took over the Bass Museum, they took part in the programming. This year we're going to double that number, so more than 200. That's a very, very diverse and inclusive group. One of the things of great importance to us last year was that it was important that we had outreach to the LGBT community to make sure that youth who identify as LGBT felt they could be a very much active part of the programming, and that was a big plus for sure. We also had a tremendous representation from indigenous communities, and there's a lot, all of us, to learn together in partnership with indigenous communities around the world about how to value the environment, how to use the environment for solutions, and how to honor the place that we've been so lucky to live, this planet. We'll host a technology expo this year where people can see firsthand some of the most cutting-edge energy, climate technology solutions, electric vehicles, solar panels, feed for cattle that reduces emissions. We'll learn about the work of entrepreneurs who are using their businesses to drive productive change, and again, on both sides of this issue, the energy access issue and the climate protection issues. We're going to have a jobs fair, which will be great because the mayor's up, they can't run for re-election again, so we'll find you something, Dan. More field trips. We loved working with FIU, University of Miami, Miami-Dade community colleges. So more excursions, more field trips, more students, more researchers, more time in the hurricane simulator, more looking at the reefs. So there's so much happening here. The intellectual community, the academic and knowledge creation community here is powerful for the country, for sure. So we hope you're all going to be a part of it. Thank you. Now I have the pleasure of introducing our program and then our first speaker. So, in the spirit of Aspen Ideas Climate, we're going to go over here and roll up our sleeves and talk about solutions to these big issues, the impacts of extreme heat on people and communities, and the implications also of sort of energy poverty for the people that we all are trying to help, ourselves, our children, and of course people around the world. The extreme heat, you don't need me to start talking about that. You're living it all the time and thinking about it. But heat waves went all across the country again this year, causing damage, destruction, loss, fires. China had its worst heat wave in history this summer. India and Pakistan both had long and hot heat waves, and then there's flooding, there's fires, there's worries about what's happening with the glaciers, but the cascading effect of extreme heat goes all across our critical systems. You know, many of the places that we're just talking about, you have a heat wave, you also have drought. You have a heat wave, you then have dry forests, and you have fires. You know, it's all connected. That's the beauty of humanity. It's also what we have to deal with. And the very systems that keep us safe from heat, like our electricity grid or other energy infrastructures, they get threatened by extreme heat. So, you know, heat in the classrooms. Guess what? That affects student learning. That's not surprising. You know, heat in people's homes. That affects the health of everybody. People that have certain conditions like asthma or who are elderly or more frail, you know, it's absolutely devastating. And then here, I didn't know this until a couple days ago. I learned that, but it makes sense. You just don't think enough. There's 100,000 people that work in outdoor professions here. So think about that. We don't know what we don't know. And that goes back to Alberto's point. We've got to get the conversation as rich as it can be so that we can look at this from all dimensions of the issue, not be defensive about the particular solutions we might think are best, but rather be thinking, how can we create together something that's bigger than its parts, a full-on approach to protecting our people and addressing these issues. The questions of environmental justice are enormous. It's always disproportionate. Whenever anything happens that's bad, it's worse for the vulnerable communities, the underrepresented, the marginalized communities, and that's critical that we keep in the forefront of our thoughts here. I think we did a good job on that at the first Aspen Ideas Climate, and we're going to keep focusing. So today, in the tradition of Aspen Ideas Climate, we'll talk a little bit about some of the innovative and scalable solutions that are being put together by a really impressive group of panelists that I'm excited to be able to interview. And so we'll have today Dr. Cheryl Holder, who's co-chair of Miami-Dade's Heat Health Task Force, co-chair of the Florida Clinicians for Climate Action. So it's great to have you here, Dr. Holder. Thank you. We have Yoka Arditi-rocha, who's the executive director of the Clio Institute in Florida. Thank you for being here. We have Amy Knowles, who's the Chief Resilience Officer for the City of Miami Beach. Amy, thank you for being here again. And then we have our first speaker who's going to come to the mic first, and then we'll have the panel discussion, and that is Crystal Lehman, who's Senior Policy Advisor for Climate Resilience at FEMA. And they're doing some really important work. You're turning the FEMA's approach in some really significant ways, and so that's going to be exciting for us to hear about. So can I invite you to come on up? Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Good morning. Hi. First, let's give a round of applause. 4 new reporters, I heard. Is that right? 4 new reporters? That's incredible. On climate. That's incredible. I will definitely let FEMA know, and the White House, I'll let them know too. But that's great. We need more coverage on this. We definitely do. So this is very important for us. So thank you so much for the warm introduction, Mayor, as well as the Aspen Institute. What's great is that Miami really does understand the challenges ahead, and they're taking it on. I really appreciate last night I spoke to a few members of the team, and really just discussing the topics here and now, it really does bring to the forefront how much of an issue this is. I think this partnership in general is an amazing one. The Aspen Institute is a wonderful model working with local governments, and thank you so much, Dan, for inviting me. And also thank you so much for Greg Gershuni, who is Executive Director of Energy and Environment Program, for also making these strides. So thank you so much. And thank you for those that are attending today. Climate resilience is not an easy topic, and natural hazards affect, of course, so many people. You can see that in the recent disaster here in your home state. Preparedness and hazard mitigation is an important factor in sustaining communities and lives. And planning really does matter. Actually, just before I came up here, I spoke with a couple people about building codes, actually. And I think overall, you're seeing the differences between when you plan ahead and be able to really look at hazard mitigation at the forefront. So let me actually introduce myself. So my name is Crystal Lehman. I am actually leading FEMA's new climate office. Before that, I was serving in the Biden administration at the White House. I was the senior advisor for climate resilience and adaptation. I was there for a year and a half. It's a pretty long time to be there, and I'm really happy to transfer over to FEMA. And while I was there, what was interesting, there was just so much opportunity and interest and investment on climate resilience. And we saw, the building code piece was a huge component of that. So I was actually involved in the launch of the National Initiative to Advance Building Codes. And when we were deciding where to have the launch, we quickly decided to have it in Florida. So we were so happy to make that announcement a couple months ago and really have Florida be at the forefront, since there is so much we can do in that space. So today, though, we're here to talk about heat, extreme heat. I hail from rural Northern California, where the temperatures this summer hit a wildly dangerous level, about 113, 115 degrees. It was dangerous to be outside. It was dangerous really to do anything. In addition, this summer, pretty much the entire nation was impacted by the heat dome, with more than 100 million under an active heat warning. And all of this happens during the day, as you can see, but of course it happens at the night as well. And a new study has shown that heat exposure at night disrupts sleep. Of course, that's pretty sensible and logical. But a new analysis shows that average global citizens are already losing 44 hours of sleep a year, which can harm mental health and physical health. The numbers are also staggering with deaths. It is estimated that more than 1,300 deaths per year in the United States are due to extreme heat. And scientists have found that extreme heat may contribute to more deaths because the official death certificates might suggest something else. The stress of a hot day increases the chance of dying from a heart attack. Infrastructure is also affected by dangerously high temperatures. Buckling roads and airport runways and warped train tracks. Some people cannot actually utilize the train tracks in an effective manner. Oftentimes, some trains actually need to go at a slower speed because the warped trains actually affect transportation. And this is the same actually with the heat of an airplane trying to take off. It's too heavy. So there are a lot of challenges here. There's a lot of economic instability. This is a real problem, but one that can be addressed, especially with partnerships here on the ground. Even here in Miami-Dade County, in the city of Miami, they're working on a Keep Safe Florida, a program to help affordable housing properties be retrofitted for the pending impacts of climate change. And all across the nation, we are seeing localities and states hire positions to address such activities, such as chief resilience officers, and even here, a chief heat officer, which I think that is incredible, really addressing the issue at hand. And it's a model for a lot of different communities. Now, let me provide a few snapshots on the progress that we have already made on the federal level. And we have done this in 3 different ways. The first is funding. The second is interagency coordination. And the third is data tools. Now, let's start with funding, since I know people like to talk about money. President Biden signed the landmark bipartisan infrastructure law that provided over $50 billion in climate resilience efforts. Yes, a big deal. Also, the Inflation Reduction Act was signed over the summer that provides additional funds that tackle extreme heat. The U.S. Department of Agriculture is receiving $1.5 billion to support tree canopy that can mitigate impacts of the urban heat island effect, with an emphasis in underserved communities. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency will receive $2.8 billion in environmental and climate grants, particularly for underserved communities, that can be used for extreme heat, among other topics as well. In addition, we recognize the energy costs associated with high temperatures. Programs such as the Health and Human Services Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, also known as LIHEAP, help keeps families safe by providing energy assistance to people in need. And over the summer, the White House worked to release over $300 million through LIHEAP to reduce summer cooling costs. HHS even released guidance for the first time to help states use this funding to get more energy-efficient air conditioners and heat pumps into homes. And this overall is part of an ecosystem. It's part of an $8 billion that the administration has put out as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law. So these are real dollars going to places that really need it. Mobilizing funding for hazard mitigation and resilience projects are necessary. In general, early this summer, what was great was that FEMA was able to really bolster its major program that does the pre-disaster work, which we call BRIC. It's the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program for fiscal year 2020. The largest BRIC investment in history. And it's not just these fundings that are going into place, it's also helping communities really think of the projects that they want to put into their community. If it's not heat, it can be drought, wildfire, flood, hurricanes, and any other hazards that might strike the community that is using the funds. In addition, equity is a huge component of all of this. BRIC is among many of the programs that the Biden administration has pushed towards the Justice 40 initiative, a program that really looks at the programs across the board on the federal level to see how we can distribute funds to disadvantaged communities. And there are much needed funds for extreme heat. Now, number 2, interagency coordination. During my time at the White House, I had the pleasure of supporting the formation of the White House Extreme Heat Interagency Working Group. This is one of 5 interagency working groups under the National Climate Task Force, focused on tackling tough climate impacts. The others include drought, wildfire, flood, and coastal resilience. This Extreme Heat Interagency Working Group is co-led by agencies, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, which actually has a new Office of Climate Change and Health Equity, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which is NOAA, and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA. Through interagency coordination on this level, we've been able to really tackle some various topics. So let's start with workforce. It was mentioned a moment ago. People work outside, right? Actually, a lot of people work outside. Heat is a growing threat to workforce safety, especially in high-risk sectors like agriculture and construction. So in April, the Vice President Harris and Secretary Labor Walsh launched the first ever national emphasis program to protect millions of workers from heat illness and injuries. On days where heat indexes are 80 degrees Fahrenheit or higher, OSHA inspectors and compliance assistants are engaged in proactive outreach and technical assistance to help stakeholders keep workers safe on the job. That's a big deal for us. Communication is often a barrier as well when it comes to extreme heat. EPA launched a Let's Talk About Heat challenge to support local communication strategies to inform people about extreme heat, with a focus on engaging underserved communities. What's great is that EPA recently announced winners, which includes Miami-Dade County, selected for the heat season campaign with a simple, empowering message of drink water, find shade, and rest. The campaign has received funds to prioritize reaching communities most at risk for heat-related illness. Research and innovative ideas is important to understanding this topic, and agencies are understanding that as well. Department of Homeland Security announced winners of the first ever Cooling Solutions Challenge Prize competition, supporting innovative ideas to help first responders, individuals, and households keep cool during extreme heat events. NOAA also is helping communities map urban heat island that can be up to 20 degrees hotter due to factors including higher pavement concentration and lower tree canopy cover. All these agencies are working together in a whole of government approach. And while I'm here representing FEMA, all the agencies are really doing their part to really strive in order to abate extreme heat activity and also try to mitigate the impacts by working with communities on the ground. So next, in the final piece I would like to share is data tools. So I love using data, especially to help it drive decision making. It really is the bedrock on which our policy should be sitting on. And at the White House, I was pleased to launch the Climate Mapping for Resilience and Adaptation, CAMRA for short, which provides a window into current and future risks, including heat. It is a website that for the first time provides a live dashboard to help communities see extreme weather and other hazards from climate change that they are facing, while also providing maps and projections on how each community could be impacted in the future. In addition, it provides more detailed location-specific data about climate threats and new portals that can bring together multiple federal information sources and funding opportunities, including the bipartisan infrastructure law. It is found at resilience.climate.gov. We try to make it as simple as possible. And for the launch of the new tool, we were joined by Miami-Dade County Mayor Cava to demonstrate the interactive tools on extreme heat, drought, wildfires, and flood. And it was wonderful to have her there in order to really showcase the importance of this new tool. This year, we also launched heat.gov. As you can see, we try to keep it as simple as possible on the websites. A new website developed through interagency collaboration to equip local officials and the public with robust and accessible information. The new centralized portal contains interactive data, but also information from CDC on heat and health tracker, and provides the latest federal information on heat. HHS has developed a LIHEAP and extreme heat website to provide online resources, including a heat stress GIS dashboard, which is a geospatial information dashboard, to help grantee recipients and stakeholders track and visualize and respond to extreme heat stressors. And overall, we can put many data sets and data tools on a website. It's really being able to utilize them. So we are doing training and demonstrations, but we do understand that data is a big component of understanding and addressing the problem. Now in closing, because I know we have a wonderful panel here today. So when I was growing up, we didn't have a lot. I lived in an area in California in a national forest, very rural, with the closest town being about a 45-minute drive. Also, the town was the size of 10,000 people. It was very small. We didn't have air conditioning in the summer, so when it was hot, my sister and I closed all the shades. We went into the freezer. We would make these little popsicles where you use like a Minute Maid lemonade and you just put like a popsicle stick in it, and that was our little treat. And we would just wait it out. And it has gotten so much worse there. And I'm not even including the fact that the wildfire smoke has now really made the challenge much more challenging, really. And it's going to be projected to get worse as well. And many people do not have air conditioning, and those that do, it's very difficult to afford it if you're leaving it on for such a long period of time, and effectively to try to cool the home. So I think what's important is we are here today to talk about the issues at hand, and also really to talk about some of the ideas that can help solve this problem. And we're not going to solve everything today, obviously, but I think we should keep in mind, the mother raising the 2 kids out in a rural area that's going to have to struggle and figure out how to do this type of activity and what kind of resources their community can provide. Because this is a challenge for communities, because it's going to affect the whole community, either families raising their kids, outside workers, really all of it. So today I implore you to think big and discuss tough questions. I, of course, will be an ally to you all, since I know that we can do this not just by ourselves in silos, but also together on the federal side and in the local side. And you are on the ground. You know your community really well. So let's go try to do this together and really try to solve big things. So with that, thank you so much. And if the panelists can then join the stage.
So, Crystal, thank you for those remarks and for joining us.
Welcome.
It was highly informative and also tremendously well
It
organized.
was a lot of information, so.
So what I'd like to do is have the other 3 panelists take a moment, introduce yourselves. We'll just do like a quick go through, and the role you play, and how you came to see the issue of heat in particular as one that really requires our focus and your leadership. Maybe we'll start with Dr. Holder.
Hi, I'm Dr. Cheryl Holder. I have lots of titles at the College of Medicine at FIU. Associate Dean Diversity, I'm also Associate Professor, but I really see myself as a primary care doctor, which I've been doing here in Dade County at Jackson Memorial Hospital since '87. And so my population has always been underserved, low wealth people, uninsured. And I go back really from me, 2016. I've seen the problem, but 2016 for me, it came to a head when one of my patients could not pay her light bill. But I didn't even realize it, that she told me she was breathing. She came in for refills and was all about breathing, her COPD getting worse. But she was buying medicines instead of paying her light bill. And it all came together in trying to find help for somebody who was living in one of these heat island neighborhoods, poor housing, poor, very vulnerable elderly woman. Yeah. And it was all about heat. Yeah. So that brings us to now where we did a survey in Dade County, and what did everybody say? Heat, heat, heat. That was their big concern. So with climate change, it's all about our planet getting hotter and the most vulnerable screaming for help, but giving us solutions too. So I'm glad this is about solutions.
Well, I think it's also very impressive that you, as a medical leader, a health leader, are a listener. And so, so often we just keep doing the thing we do without engaging with those we want to serve to hear what problems and issues are emerging for them.
Yeah, docs, we're supposed to be listeners, and so I'm glad that I have. As a primary care, you can't, that's what we do the best. Yeah. And most importantly, we're also trusted messengers.
That's
when
right.
you look at our studies, pharmacists, nurses are number one, so any nurses out there, nurses, doctors, pharmacists were trusted messengers. Yeah. So when we listen and can bring this communication of what is happening to your health and what is happening to our climate, it's a little bit easier to move that ball faster. So that's our goal, is to really save some lives.
Well, thank you. So Yoka?
Hi. I think for the Clio Institute, heat has always been an issue that we've been trying to solve. Obviously, we're a nonprofit based in Miami that for the last 13 years have been trying to mobilize the masses for climate action. I feel like Caroline should be here telling this story. I stand on her shoulders and all the work that she has led for over 13 years and really awakening the community. And Caroline realized very quickly that in our vulnerable communities, heat was a major threat multiplier. And the intersectionality of the issue was something that we needed to highlight. So we've been working for many, many years trying to amplify the issues of economic, racial, and social disparities. And the fact that people do not have access to life-saving issues, for example, having access to air conditioning was something that she had identified many, many years ago. And we've been trying to map vulnerability in our communities for many years together with the county and the city as well. And so for the Clio Institute, we really work with a bottom-up and top-bottom approach, and trying to really not only build up the movement and the masses in a grassroots level, but also work with policy and policymakers from grass-top level as well. We work at the local level, we work at the state level, but we also work at the federal level to push for climate resilience.
Thank you, Yoka. And I'm going to ask Yoka about youth in a minute, where they're doing some amazing work. Amy, can I ask you to open up sort of the audience's understanding to your work and how you got into it?
Yeah, oh, absolutely, and good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. The Chief Resilience Officer role is somewhat new to government. It's been around maybe 5-6 years, but it's spreading, and it's an important role because what we do is bring together in a holistic way all of these different resilience concerns, whether it's heat, whether it's flooding, whether it's aging infrastructure, and we work on them together. I've spent my career in environmental protection. I started as an inspector in Miami-Dade County, understanding our infrastructure systems, and moved to be working on sustainability. And resilience is so important because it ties all of that together with the urban fabric of our cities. And so cities have an opportunity, counties have opportunities to change that urban fabric in a way that will protect people. So that is very much of what I work on. everything from implementing policies and ordinances to actual projects. We have to, actually get it done. Miami Beach is 61% impervious. Yes, we're so lucky to have beautiful coastal breezes, but it's hot, and it's very hot in areas of more concrete. And it's just, it's a symptom of how climate change is worsening. It's a symptom of a stress that we're seeing, and it's something that we're actively working on. What I love about this team here is they're talking about how to help people right now, where sometimes cities and counties and these larger structures, we're focusing on investing now for our generation, but almost the longer term, so it'll take a little bit longer. But we've done a lot in those areas as well as I'll share those.
Thank you, Amy. And Crystal, as you're sitting here, you're taking the perspective in your role of the country, of the nation. But here you are with three, major local leaders who are getting it done. And just any
You're really getting it done. I mean, I think overall, the federal government really is here to help provide resources, funding, enable. I think that's a big word we try to use, because you all on the ground actually know what's happening. We're not going to pretend that we know what's going on. And also, I think I loved what you were saying, the trusted voices too, and the familiar voices as well. So I'm just really happy to really learn from you all and what we can be doing a lot more in order to really tackle this issue that is heat in an area that's going to be experiencing a lot more of it in the future.
Yep, thank you. So I thought I'd ask questions for about 20 minutes and then open it up to the audience. So if you have something you'd like to pose, formulate your thought, and we'll come back around in Aspen style. So let me start with Dr. Holder. So you're living, you're a witness to what's happening in real people's lives, and extreme heat has been getting worse and worse. It also disproportionately impacts some communities. And so will you say a little bit about that, about what you've observed in terms of the community impacts?
Yeah, it's not a surprise. Everybody has seen this for generations about poverty and who gets sicker, who dies earlier, and for so many reasons. And of course, where you live, where you work, where you play, that's what drives your health. We know the policies, your money, that's what drives your health. So it's no surprise, again, that the population I care for, uninsured, poor, Black, Hispanic, are going to be at the forefront. The housing infrastructure, the food, they're outdoor workers. And not just your regular outdoor workers on farms, but if you're in Miami, there are a lot of folks who come up to your cars and sell you oranges and sell you things. Those are outdoor workers too, and those are my patients. And I see the kidney damage. I see when the asthma gets exacerbated because nobody remembers about the kids. And heat is particularly dangerous in Miami in that it is all year pretty much. So when we see the excess deaths of 34, it's not a heat wave that hit Chicago for 1 week or a heat wave in California. It's the persistence of that heat over time. And if you're a kid and the ozone is higher at the lower levels, we see the rising rates of asthma in Black and Hispanic kids. It's not a surprise. It's all the intersection of the poverty and the issues, and then the heat and the health outcomes. So this is what we deal with day to day as vulnerable populations. So Hurricane Ian, who died of that 119? We know it was elderly. They didn't have the resources in 24 hours to mobilize. You gotta give them more time. You gotta give them more help. So we see that day in and day out. The excess deaths in Miami, we know who they are. They're poor people with lung problems and heart problems and diabetes and obesity. They've weathered.
Yeah.
So that's who I care for, but they have solutions, and so that's what Aspen is all about. The urgency of our response to the climate crisis, that's what the population I care for is saying. We're dying now. If we urgently respond, we can help save you.
Let me ask you another question. You're one of the leaders in the country in this idea of the social determinants of health. The society that we're a part of influences our health in all sorts of ways, and it's disproportionate based on certain kinds of absences or that some communities have. But you're also, I know, about helping people have agency and be able to act and take control of their lives, even when there's inequity. And communities rely on themselves. They have to. So I want to ask you a little bit about this idea of climate literacy, of agency, of helping people have information that helps them make the most informed choices. And
Yeah.
what have you learned about that?
Well, what we've been doing, I'm with the Florida Coalition for Climate Action and also as a heat officer, the heat health officer person. And using those experiences over 30 years and knowing the power of our communities, we've developed we call CHOT, Climate Health Outreach Team. But it's from people with the community, with trusted messengers, nurses, doctors. We are now, with funding from the HEAT and from Health Foundation and Baptist, looking at it as taking these groups into 50 designated health centers that really are in the highest vulnerability index areas. And we've already mapped those. That's Homestead, that's Opelika, that's Hialeah. And when you look at the cement, 1 feet above sea level rise, poor infrastructure, it makes sense. We know that's where the illnesses are coming, the outdoor workers, that's where the heat problems will be. So we're going to go into those communities and bring access and information to not just the community, but to the doctors and the nurses, because they are our key. If you look at 22 million healthcare providers in the country, each doctor has about 3,000 patients. Think about how much we can use that education through clinicians to mobilize and educate our communities. So we're going to go in the highest risk areas with our team. And this can be very easily replicated. It's not very expensive because we know, again, urgent response for vulnerable population, to scale it and sustain it cannot be expensive. And so that's what we're using, digital QR codes, because typing in stuff doesn't work for a lot of our community. But you need somebody to help guide you. So we're going to have a team, and we're training students. I see one of our CHOT team members over there, and they come from our communities. And we're training FIU volunteer students, pre-med students are volunteered to go in and bring that information to the communities in readily accessible
I mean, what
way.
you're doing is you're addressing that fundamental reality of trust, of social trust, and how do we engage in a way that builds trust as opposed to
Look like your community,
exactly,
speak like your community. We really care about you as physicians, as nurses, and we're here to help you. But education has to start. So you got to do it foundation. We know it's not going to change behavior. Policy drives that. But if the community comes together with one voice like they did, that says heat is our problem in Miami-Dade County, we got a chief heat officer. We have a health task force. So we can continue to mobilize that. And using these teams and funding, and we're also, I got to say, with Baptist Hospital, we have a series of CMEs. We just did one on the 18th yesterday, where we're free CMEs about heat and climate change and health, and they'll be accessible to every physician in the state of Florida.
Wow, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So, Yoka, say a little bit about the engagement of young people, which you are so good at doing. What do you do, and why is it important?
Well, let's put a little bit of context, right? Let's talk about that the climate crisis is really a leadership crisis. I think we heard today that the solutions exist, but we lack the political will to enact them. And so from a very early stage at the Clio Institute, we recognize the incredible passion that youth leaders have in solving this issue. And so for many years, we have created programs to really empower them and give them the resources they need and build a movement that we're seeing globally, really. Gianna Hutton, which you really clearly and mentioned, was part of our program since middle school.
Wow.
And so we have many Gianna Huttons here in the state of Florida. Yesterday they met, 60 or something of them in a monthly Zoom meeting, and talk about possible tactics and solutions to really address that leadership crisis that we're suffering. And we know that leaders react to pressure. And so somebody mentioned John Doerr's speed and scale. And we know that the solutions are mapped. But for us to really cut greenhouse gases in time, as the science mandates, we need to do so in the next upcoming election cycles. And so we are in the accelerating part of the business. We are trying to push for policies and really persuade policymakers in enacting those policies as soon as possible. And we're also in the business of building that youth movement. We have really scaled our efforts throughout college campuses in the state of Florida. And we're using the power of media, traditional media, digital media. We just launched a campaign several weeks ago that really has gotten to more than 300 million people through earned media and digital media. We have a viral video out there that has reached more than 150,000 people. We flooded a store here in Miami Beach to grab people's attention. So innovative campaigns is really what resonates to our youth leaders, and so we're really hoping that these future leaders are the ones that are going to take us where we have to go, whether it's at the polls, whether it's in the technology and innovation that we need to continue solving the biggest crisis and the biggest issue that we're facing right now.
What would you like to see those of us who are older and the institutions of our society do to support your efforts to elevate youth perspectives and youth voice?
So, we know that to build resilience, we need an informed and prepared public. And it starts with education. And that has been at the core, our pillar at the Clio Institute. Yet, it rarely gets funded. Yeah. We have the 4th largest school district here in Miami-Dade County. And we have been serving the school district with our limited resources for decades. And this Resilient 305 strategy, which is a great strategy that was unveiled in 2019, and I'm sure Amy will talk about, has a line item for climate resilience education that has no funding. We can't expect to prepare the leaders of tomorrow if we're not focusing on their education now. And so if there's something that I could ask is, let's look at that, because this is where we're building the next Gianna Huntons.
Yeah.
And so we have the theory of change. We have it. We know they care about this issue. And we know that for us to really catalyze the kind of action we need to make climate the top number 1 or number 2 issue at the voting polls. And we're getting there here in Florida. Already climate and the environment is the top 4 or 3rd issue. In the nation, it's about 8. But I'm sure the last climate emergency episodes that we have seen this past year will probably bring that up. And that's where we need to really invest in really accelerating the movement, because that's where we're going to get the biggest bang for our buck.
Yeah, thank you. What a great answer. Thank you. So Amy, you're involved in something called Resilient 305. And what is that, and why is it important?
Sure. Well, I mean, I'd be happy to story tell for a moment here. You know, a few years ago, the Rockefeller Foundation launched a new initiative called 100 Resilient Cities. And it was really brought together to address a few different things: climate change, globalization, and urbanization of our world. And that was a phenomenal program. And we, Miami Beach, got together with Miami-Dade County and the city of Miami. We were selected to be a 100 Resilient City, and we created a plan. We used to call ourselves a 3-headed monster, because it's not simple to create a strategy together across municipal boundaries and lines. But that is ancient history, and we have our plan, and we meet at least every month to talk about moving forward the most important initiatives. And so what that means is that we have a team approach, that we have partners in addressing some of these top issues. And it might sound simple, but we share information. We share model ordinances. We build on each other's projects. We share procurement documents. Anything to make it easier to move addressing these resilience challenges forward. So that has been really important. We work globally at a Resilient Cities Network level, and then we also work regionally with the Southeast Florida Climate Change Compact, which actually is releasing a new climate action plan that does focus on heat tremendously. So I think there's many layers to this and many ways to come together. From my perspective, that's knowledge building, that's partnerships, that's working on this to get it done and to find those solutions. But practically speaking, I think that the real work happens within cities. It happens within our teams, from the planners to our infrastructure team to our capital team, of course, our environmental sustainability team, but we all work together. And I have a great example for you, and the trees are moved now, but our director of the Miami Beach Convention Center construction has been working hard with the developers of a new hotel. And one of the things that we did as a city a few years ago is adopt a very strong tree preservation ordinance. Now, there's a lot of tree preservation ordinances across our state and across our county, but ours is incredibly strong. And just last week, we actually moved, instead of removing or mitigating and replanting, we moved 2 calophyllum trees about 50 feet tall that each weighed 70 tons on these massive flatbeds and moved them to a new home. We had to, of course, close all of the streets. We had to remove light poles. It was just this massive entire weekend effort. And, you know, our city hall, we were all so excited. And I hope you get to see the trees on your way out. They're now in Pride Park, and they're beautiful. And actually, now they're going to get to thrive because they have more space. But that's an example of, you know, that's an example where the development community came together. You know, our city team pushed and did everything possible to help this. But can you imagine what it would take to replace the environmental benefits of those trees that are 60 years old? And there's 49 more there to move. So I think it's a, yes, it costs more, yes, it's harder, but the investments, I think, are well worth it.
I'll connect the dot here that Crystal talked about the whole of government approach, and this is the whole of regional government approach, and it's really coming together. And it's making impacts, as an example, well beyond the region, too. So Mayor Levine Cava created the first heat officer, chief heat officer. I was at a conference of cities.
I think that's
So, you know, we've got #1 here. I go to this conference of cities, and there's 6 others now that have been created around the world. In Los Angeles and Athens, chief heat officers are there, and they're talking about Miami-Dade as a place that inspired their action. And this place really matters, whether it's in the field of health and medicine, the field of youth advocacy and investment education, whether it's in the whole government approach. It makes many impacts well beyond what is necessary right here. And I want to ask you, what is it that gives you your hope and your belief in the power and importance of government to work together at the local level to get things done?
Well, I mean, I'm a lifelong public servant. You know, my first job, age 21 out of college, was with, you know, Miami-Dade County. So it's part of who I am. I think it's something part of who you are when you serve, and it's for the greater good. I mean, I'm definitely a glass half full person, and I believe in the power to change. I mean, we have to believe that we can change and that we can, you know, have hope to create better cities in the future to better serve, you know, our community and protect people. But there's things we can do now, and I think that's why this work is so important, to address the urgency of it. But there's things we can very thoughtfully do for the future. And so I think that's why, you know, working for Miami Beach has been so rewarding, because we are able to work together holistically. So we're not just saying it, we're actually doing it. You know, besides the tree item that I mentioned, you know, we have an urban forestry master plan that envisions what type of trees to put in different areas so that they will be most resilient for heat, you know, saltwater intrusion. We have an urban heat island ordinance that actually says for new development, roofs have to be cool roofs, so they have to be sustainable roofing systems. We have a North Beach master plan that our planning team created a beautiful resilient overlay so that new construction that comes in actually has to, you know, have shade structures on their buildings, put larger trees in, so that we're designing, you know, that kind of city that is going to be able to accommodate these challenges. So that's what I'm most excited about. That's what I, you know, wake up every day excited about. How to get it done, that wakes me up at night sometimes.
Well, it's wonderful. It's inspiring to hear. And of course, the Aspen Institute wouldn't be here except for the fact that your mayor and his chief of staff said, we got to do more here. Let's use the power of our positions to attract this big nonprofit to come be a part of what the community is doing and help amplify it, contribute to it. Let me ask one question of Crystal, then we'll open it up. And you talked about the federal government as the enabler, which is, I think, such a thoughtful way to frame it. It hasn't always been framed that way, of course. Sometimes, like, we're government, we're here to tell you what to do. But very different. You're a different generation, and it's a different time. And there's a couple tools that you mentioned, which was the climate mapping for resilience and adaptation, and the other, adaptation. The other is there's a resource library that's also been developed, I think. Those are examples of tools created that this community could perhaps access. And could you just say a little bit more about, like, how to access these kinds of resources and what your hopes are for what communities will do with these resources?
Sure. I mean, it won't let you move a 7-8 ton tree. You have to figure out different ways of doing that. That's still very impressive. But it is an enabler in many different facets. And one of the great reasons why we developed it was because, one, we understood there was going to be quite a bit of funds going out the door, and people really should have an understanding what type of risks are in their area and how they can really try to solve for that. That was a big enabling factor for us initially, but then when we were developing it, we realized, oh, this is not just for people who are going to be investing federal dollars. This is for everyone. This is going to be for academics. This is going to be for people just to understand what's happening in their community, just to have an understanding. And it's evolved to a space where not only you can look at the real-time impacts, if you look on it now, you can see what areas are in extreme heat advisory warning, what areas are in a flood warning, what areas are in a drought warning, right? You can also see the future conditions as well, which is the whole point of this conversation, is that this is the future. And what's interesting is when I show this tool to people, we actually developed it where you have low emission scenario and high emission scenario, and the differences between the two is incredible. It's stark, right? And I think even within that framing, we need to understand we could be heading in different directions here. And we're giving the options on the table which direction we'll be heading, but it's pretty plain to see what we need to be doing in order to be much more adaptive to this space, but also reactive to this space as well. So I'll just say we're really excited. We're doing a phase 2 right now. I mean, the White House is leading that. As FEMA, we're supporting where we can. But overall, we just understand getting it in the hands of anyone. It's all public information. It's all free. You know, it's the federal government. But making sure you have the most up-to-date, federally vetted data that has information that you may need. Obviously, as we get more information, we'll be including it. But we don't want you all have to do the data piece, right? Like, you have a lot more on your plate than need to, like, crunch numbers. Like, we can do that, and then we can provide it to folks in order to have a better understanding of what's happening on the ground.
Thank you so much. So let me open it up and ask if there anyone here that has a question you'd like to pose. Yes, right here.
Hi, thanks so much. Robin Baggett from the Office of Civic and Community Engagement at the University of Miami. Thanks to our amazing panelists who are doing just great work on the ground. And in relation to local data, I just wanted to let everyone know that we will be launching a new tool on December 5th, and many of you here have been our community partners. This is part of our Affordable Housing and Climate Equity Solutions Lab. So we've been mapping for many years access to affordable housing and cost burden, sea level rise, storm surge, elevation, and flooding. But at the December 5th launch, we'll be adding extreme heat, and that's looking, again, it's a partnership, and that's looking at extreme heat in relation to issues of affordability, access, and equity, also the history of redlining and disinvestment. So understanding, like Dr. Holder was saying, she's one of our advisors, you know, how is it that vulnerable communities can adapt? How can we address the issues of historic disinvestment? Again, like the federal government tools, these are all free, publicly accessible, interactive, so we look forward to all of you joining us on December 5th at History Miami for this launch of this heat tool. Thanks.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you. Caroline.
Thank you. I'm loving this, Dan. Thank you so much. Thank you all for highlighting heat. The Clio Institute, we have a justice lens like nobody's business, and the vulnerability and the scope of vulnerability in our backyard keeps us awake at night. So I love what Robin is doing. I'm on her team as well. And we're mapping all the vulnerability. But I want to ask Amy, I know Yoko knows this, all of you, how do we map the solutions? When do we start weighing the baby and measuring how vulnerable we are? I had a great chat with Aspen father, Bezos, whatever, about that, and about, you know, and I said to them, it's not about, I want to know where all the vulnerability is, but what are we doing about it? And somebody kept saying, Caroline, we need data-driven solutions. I said, okay, what if the data's telling us
So
people are dying?
let's get this group going on that question.
Let's go.
So, and I'm going to let her ask you, who is Aspen's father? Is it, but mapping solution. Anybody want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to talk about a few things that we've done on Miami Beach. You know, I think what is difficult as a practitioner is that we do work and we're moving on to the next work. And it's very hard, I think, for all of us in our lives to pause and to really carefully plan out how to measure that. What were the impacts? Did it work? How are we learning? But we do try to do that. You know, in one particular neighborhood that we did a lot of infrastructure work in, we measure avoided tidal flooding incidents where we would have seen flooding. We have done studies to map different types of pavement and the applications and how did it change temperatures. But I think a lot of the work that, you know, UM's talking about the camp project, we have a Resilient 305 collaborative with FIU, Miami-Dade College, where we're actually mapping a north district from Miami Beach all the way through Little River District. And there's a whole series of metrics that are being mapped. And what we're looking at is, over time, what changes will we see? So we're looking at everything from, you know, income to how many bus stops are there to, you know, different FEMA flooding information. And I have to see, is heat in there? You know, I think it's a great question. We're doing a new vulnerability assessment for our city, and we're including heat now. And this is something we're kicking off really soon, and that wasn't talked about, you know, 6 years ago. So I think it's a great point, and how do we demonstrate that what we're doing is working, or just learning, right? Not everything is successful. How do we learn and change?
Let me ask Dr. Holder
Yeah.
this one too. Yeah.
We're looking at physicians' code, clinicians' code. And in our coding, that's going to be one of the key areas that we can transfer this information. So part of our training as we're going out to clinicians is using the ICD-10 coding system to capture the problems as we see them and to connect the dots. So that patient showing up with decompensated COPD is not just about non-adherence to medication, but it was triggered by the heat. And we're also working with EMT, as the Heat Health Task Force. These are things that we're looking at with the EMT. When they go out, how are they capturing that data? So you may see a bump at first because we're capturing so much data, but that's one of the goals, is that also we're working, I was just with the Underlie in their conference, as public health, how do you capture health information as we're making these changes to outdoor space, to the infrastructure? Because with this digital work and smart cities, you can capture much more of that information and then transfer it over to the health sector. Yeah. And then how do we react? There's a group out of in the Bronx River doing that, capturing that data on the pollution levels and the health impact, and they work with several of their hospitals so that there's alert going to the community. And that's what we're looking at here. How do we transfer information to like Jackson and UHealth when the heat, especially when you look at preterm labor, how does that translate into protecting the community? Do we have less preterm labor? Because we're getting more data on that. So this is an opportunity to bring the digital world data together and simplify it in a way in our community that they can use that information. We brought it simply down to contact your mom, call grandma, call auntie, call uncle to check in when the temperatures, when they get the alerts, and we're trying to have the alert system. And then does that check-in result in less ER utilization for uncontrolled diabetes, COPD, less heart attacks? So it's a lot of opportunity in the future.
Just a quick follow-up too, is that I bet you that your experience tells you there's a lot of wisdom and experience in the community for dealing with heat. This is, you know, people have been doing this for years, generations, that is not necessarily sought or heard by the medical establishment, the public health establishment. Is that true, and is that a problem?
You know, when you go into neighborhoods, these are where ordinances and noise ordinance and loitering ordinances come in to be a problem. Because in poorer communities, they will congregate under the trees and in the parking lots under the trees. In the Spanish, you'll see them playing dominoes. In the Black communities, they'll be playing spades. Yet then there's harassment with the population. The kids will be out basketball. You harass them on the concerning about crime prevention, but really is getting out of the hot apartments, because even if you have AC, you can't afford it. Yeah. And there's more and more days of heat, which is what most rich people, you've just changed your thermostat and go a little bit longer into the heat season. But when you're heat season, we do it from May to October. But in reality, in Dade County, it's really February that is getting hotter. Those extra 2 months of expenses is not, it's just not possible. So there, people come out in the communities, so you'll have more loud music, then you have more complaints that there's noise outside, especially as there's gentrification in the communities where the poorer people had always congregated. You'll see more of that cultural clashing of what your community should sound like. But it's really because it's too hot, they've got to get out the houses. So these are, I mean, it's just so compounding. Screens. I had a patient who had Zika. She lived in a community. She doesn't have screens. There's no ordinance that says, no policy that mandates screens. So when she got her Zika and her baby was not infected, but she ended up with postpartum depression. So I see her for postpartum depression because the health sector for mental health is so bad. And I'm primary. Now it all comes that we put in some screens in her house. Maybe that night she would have screened it off. She wouldn't have gotten Zika that night. You know, so these are how it compounds. But again, the population is screaming out. It's happening to me now. We can make a difference. We did it with HIV. In 30 years, we were able to take HIV from killing so many people to undetectable, untransmissible. And we'll get a vaccine soon. That's 30 years. We got 30 years for this climate to reduce the 1.5. We can do this because we did it. Again, we did it before.
I hope we can get our crack social media team to take that clip right there and get 77 million hits. Incredible. Question?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Albert, local citizen. And I love, since we're talking about heat, I figured I'd throw some cold water on everybody here. So I'm asking you, you know, we have a good game down here. We spin well. When it comes to practice, there's a departure. And I ask each of you, because from unfunded mandates on a stated policy, whether it be not incorporating education at the Miami-Dade Public Schools, whether it be not having community participatory budgets for development of how we're deploying. Perfect example, 27th Avenue, transit zone, building a high-rise, but removing 17 mahogany trees, old growth mahogany trees. Not having the value proposition and everybody at the table. How do we bring everybody to the table, community included, to drive true values to all the points that we need to address? If it is heat, let's talk about trees, let's talk about AC, but let's not talk about them in silos or fund 10 AC units for a community that doesn't have any trees in their neighborhood. How do we really talk about intersectional budgets and really bring the community to bear on this? Can they do this? Do the mayors and or elected officials do this? How do we do this?
Okay, big question. It's really about participatory democracy. Anybody want to take a shot?
I can start. And Albert's question it's a really relevant one. We have been working in silos for so many years because, again, the solutions exist, right? But right now, I'm filled with so much hope and optimism. And I'm also a half full kind of glass. But we are in a really pivotal moment in history. The passing of the bipartisan infrastructure law, the passing of CHIPS, and the passing of the Inflation Reduction Law that brings $369 billion to make our communities climate ready gives me tremendous hope. Yes, there are many silos, but now we have resources. And I think now we're starting to see people understand that we can solve this. Now, bringing the table, we have to bring it to the community because the communities know how to do it. They know what they need. They're lacking safety nets. And we need to make sure that at the center of every solution, people are in the middle. We need to be looking for people-centered solutions. And so when we have projects like the Army Corps of Engineers bringing in $4+ billion to our community, people need to be at the center of the solution, not protecting property be the center of the solution. It's people's livelihood. so working together in community with everybody involved is how we're going to be able to do this. It's the only way. There's no other way. And I think, with regards to the heat issue, we need to also acknowledge that access to electricity and access to air conditioning, it's a human right for states like Florida. And we need to have the mandate at the state level to make sure that that is really at the core of the policies that we need to be going after. Because people that do not have access to electricity, people that do not have access to cooling, are really putting their lives at risk. And so with access to energy, and we have to think about with the energy justice lens, we together as a community, we can make sure that while we're building our communities to be more resilient, we're also tackling the root of the source, which is global heating and the continuous spewing of heat-trapping gases into the atmosphere because of our addiction to fossil fuels. We are in the sunshine state, and 75% of our energy comes from fossil fuels, warming, polluting energy source from outside of our state. We import all that, spending millions and millions of dollars. We can be energy independent. We're the sunshine state, and we're not harnessing the power of the sun. And so we need to think about all these solutions that we are at hand, but we're not seizing that. But with the funding and the will and the leadership, we can do this.
I noticed that we have some students in the audience, and I don't know if anybody who is a student or would like to pose a question. There's at least some younger. There's some.
There's one of.
Is it okay if we go over there for a second? Because I'm really excited to see this group of younger participants.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sophia. I was born and raised here in South Florida. I'm 22. I myself am a climate communicator, and I wanted to know, in your experience, what is the most effective strategy you've found as it relates to communicating climate issues here in our frontline community?
For me, it's their health. And every patient, every time I go out and I talk about to someone, I don't know any person who is low health who doesn't have somebody with asthma in their family. And anybody who's noticed that they can't sleep at night. Again, because your cost is so high, you can't keep the thermostat low, so most of my poor population are having sleeping difficulties. You mentioned it beautifully.
It's very bad.
It's been, and because the nights are not cooler, you don't acclimatize as well, and so you never cool your body enough, so then it's just discomfort for the whole day, and that's why you see the chronic 34 excess deaths. And everybody I know. So when I start talking about allergies worse, everybody, yep. The heating, I can't sleep, yep, that's me. Asthma, yep. COPD, yep. I bring the health, and everybody understands immediately in my population. Trees growing faster. That is huge in Dade County in my communities because they get the code ordinances and the code people come in and tell them their sidewalks needs to be fixed and they need to cut the trees. You can't do it on the incomes of the people that I do, so they can't afford cutting their trees and pruning at the level that's needed because trees are growing faster. Then somebody comes in and says, trees is what we need. And I'm like, no, we don't. And then my community says, no, I don't need another tree because I can't afford it. Everybody's like, they don't want trees. Everybody wants trees, but you gotta bring more than trees if you're gonna come to the poor communities. And this has been the clash of needs, wants, and urgent responses. So this is the issue, but everybody I know can relate very rapidly.
I want to try to take two more questions. So we have one there who was patient.
Well, good morning. I first wanted to congratulate the City of Miami Beach, the Knight Foundation, Miami Herald, our friends. I'm from the Israeli Consulate Overseas Cultural Affairs, and now the past year, climate as well. Panel, fantastic, Aspen Institute. So I wanted to ask, what are your engagements internationally? I know the state of Israel, the country of Israel, has been very focused on reforesting. That I love the whole tree aspect of this. I also just came back from Cartagena, Colombia, where sea level rise is affecting the city on a constant basis every time during the day with the rise of the tide. And they're cutting down trees throughout the city. So if you can talk about how you work internationally, I know it's mostly focused locally and federally and state, but if you can somehow address that. Thank you very much.
Anybody have a?
I'm happy to take this one. When the Resilient Cities Initiative began, it was a global initiative. And I think one thing that was phenomenal is that we were able to pick up the phone and talk to CROs from other cities just like that. So for example, when Zika hit, we picked up the phone and spoke with the chief resilience officer in Rio to say, how are you handling these issues? In terms of heat, we looked to cities like Paris who have opened up their schools as cooling centers. We're able to look at cities like New York that have established a buddy system when heat stress is coming. So I think that it is always an opportunity to reach out and learn. I've personally been to the Netherlands. I've been to Santiago, Chile to share about resilience strategies and learn. And these are things that I personally bring back, and they're evidenced in our Resilient 305 strategy. So I think it's so important to weave that into the day-to-day. It's very easy to get into operations and forget that there's other places in the world that are working on the same things, but it's important for us and for me personally that we use those professional networks because we're all working on the same issues. We really are, and they are scalable, and they are suitable for all different parts of our society.
I'm going to keep us moving on questions so that we can try to get two more that I saw hands up. So, well, okay, we're going to do the best we can. We're supposed to end at 12, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Let's call this the lightning round. Can everybody ask their question in one sentence? And then we'll take 3 questions, and then we'll answer them. So lightning round, everybody's got to be short.
My question is how we educate the tourists and snowbirds to know about recycling and what what this city does.
Okay, hold that thought. The tourists and the snowbirds. Your question.
I am the I'm the Chief Experience Officer at Patch of Heaven Sanctuary. We're a 20-acre forest preserve, and we are trying to reconnect humans at the level of nature. My question is, in the entire conversation around resilience, you've left out the #1 thing, how humans weather the storm.
Okay, third question. We're going to have 4 because you're passionate. Okay.
What a great panel today. Thank you so much. We're here to talk about solutions and mapping solutions, how we have been working on silos. More than a question, I want to offer this civic engagement tool, I See Change. We're here working with the city of Miami successfully for the past 2 years, documenting flooding. And now we will be working with Miami-Dade County, including heat. And so we are working with the community on the ground, gathering all this information, the social impacts of climate change. People really sharing how they're impacted, and we'd love to partner with you all.
Thank you. There were a couple semicolons in your sentence, and it was very good. Okay.
So we all sit here in a beautiful aquifer just below our feet. Mm-hmm. As we have sea rising level rising, are you working on programs that will guarantee that people have access to potable water without contaminating our world with plastic that are including invading our ocean?
Okay, good question. So we have 3 questions and an excellent statement. And what I love about this, is that this is why we're having Aspen Ideas Climate. Yeah. So everybody, come to the summit in March. There's a lot of passion, there's a lot of ideas, a lot of voices, and we definitely want to keep this going, multi-day gathering, not just one gathering. So I'll invite everybody to make a comment. Again, you're on the same guideline. I'll give you 3 sentences. Can you give a quick answer to one of these questions, and then we can also talk afterwards. So maybe I want to jump in, and Chris, I'm going to save you for last, so you can pull it all together.
So a couple things, and I'll start because there's a lot about the city. One thing that's unique about Miami Beach is that our communications and social media presence is very large, and it's well beyond our city boundaries. It's not just residents. So we have a huge following. And resilience is tied into our messaging, the environment's tied into our messaging, and we are constantly putting out information. We have a website, MB Rising Above, and we also started a program called Plastic Free MB, voluntary, which has actually been spread to Plastic Free 305, is being spread all over Miami-Dade County. We have also banned smoking on our beaches, and we also are not allowing plastic bottles on, our city facilities and on our beaches anymore. So I think it's movements like that, and I think it inspires other cities. We hear from others to do that, and it's also, helping the business perspective. I
Okay.
can't remember any other questions.
Well, so another question was about the tourists, and when I was at the summit in Amsterdam, the mayor of Amsterdam expressed your exact same question. They have 22 million tourists, and they wish they only had 11, because 11 million of them just come and party and leave a mess. So, anybody, I know this is maybe not anybody's expertise, but any thought about that?
In our heat task force, that's one of the issues that has been discussed. And that's when we had the campaign. And if you see the campaign, it was about shade, water. And we hope that these campaigns get to everyone. And in particular, because acclimatization is so important to adapt. So we're looking at how we're going to work with the government in preparing travel agent, and even the message that leaves here, so people come prepared, have the extra water. We had a campaign, and I went on the radio around these big urban outdoor festivals, which is a very big time for acute heat exhaustion and heat stress. And so that's what we did. So I went on the radio. It was Rolling Loud, is the big one up in Miami Gardens. And so we went, and I went on the radio. So these are the things that we've done in the heat task force, but linking the health message with the population, knowing that I'm gonna pass out. Also policies, there's one outdoor activity, they were charging $10 for the bottles of water, so we're trying to push the policy that in these big outdoor things where the tourist comes, there's access to free water. So there are a lot of things that we're doing in terms of health.
Yep. Yeah, thank you. And, Aspen Ideas Climate is being held in March this year, so I like to think of us as an alternative spring break for anyone who...
Can I just add to it? I think also all of that is important, but again, education is key. And where are the public service announcements that we grew up with, This is your brain. This is, everybody remembers that, I got the punch already. But back to your question, communications, that's key. Climate, it's a complex, abstract issue. And if we don't make it easy, digestible for people to understand how it impacts them, they don't make the connection. When people understand that a changing, warming climate is affecting their pockets, it's affecting their property insurance, it's affecting their health, it's affecting, migrations and immigration. When people put those dots together, then climate and a warming climate is going to be the top issue for everybody. And so we need to have really easy campaigns, communication campaigns, and repetition.
One of the great communicators on the planet Earth whose home is here is Emilio Esteban. And Emilio made a song for Aspen Ideas Climate. And the song was called We've Still Got Time. I thought that was so motivating.
That's good.
It's one message, but there is still time. We have to work. Can I ask you, Crystal, any closing thoughts?
Yes, I think people are really thinking about this, which is the intent of this session here. And one item I failed to mention, and someone mentioned aquifers, is the cascading effects that you mentioned earlier on. Like extreme heat does cause drought and also problems with the wildfire activity as well. We've been looking at water conservation as a potential mechanism. That's not a solution that's going to solve all problems, but there are various solutions. We talked about energy burden. Like that's a huge component of this conversation, is the energy justice, energy burden, affording clean energy, right? Like that's a big piece of it too. And also finding solutions for it. We have energy efficiency, weatherization, but all of this costs money. And so what's challenging is finding the resources. I mentioned 2 major laws that were just passed. That's going to be spread across the entire nation, but we are looking at being able to leverage those funds with other communities to be able to say, these are the projects you want to see in your community. How can we as the federal agencies do to support you? And they're coming through, so they're coming fast and furious, but honestly, you all are coming up with pretty good, you've been thinking about this, right? So you're already coming up with really good ideas, and you're already partnering with each other, and you already know what is the challenges on the ground. So I'm expecting to see Miami come up with some really good projects. And so when I come back here, I'm expecting to see some really good projects that we can all fund and then point to other communities around the nation that this can be done in an area that is experiencing heavy flood, heavy extreme heat temperatures, all of these heavy disasters, and is able to be successful in it.
Well, come on down in the first week of March, because you're going to see it at Aspen Ideas Climate Year 2. Thank you all for being here, especially Mayor Galbraith. Thank you all.